Spring 2003, near ancient Uruk, where the Euphrates once braided through the desert, a remote sensing team maps a clean rectangle under old river silt. Not a natural riverbed meander, a plan, right angles, interior cells, the kind of geometry architects make and rivers don't. Days pass, then the dig stops, fencing appears, checkpoints, no more access. At night, locals describe lowboy trailers under tarps, generators humming, floodlights on tripods, pallets winched into trucks, and then nothing. No press release, no final report, just a silence that feels louder than any announcement. So here's the question as simply as I can put it. Did someone quietly lift a high-value tomb out of a dry riverbed while the world was distracted? Or did a fog of war and rumor fill the vacuum that no one bothered to explain? In this video, I'm going to test both stories. I'll walk through what the burial tradition actually says, why there is very compelling evidence that this story is actually true, and what the records do and don't show. If you're new here, I don't ask you to believe me, I ask you to look at the receipts with me. First, a picture you can hold in your head. Spring 2003. Sensors draw a rectilinear layout near Warka, the modern site of Uruk. Within days, activity halts, perimeter goes up, access is restricted. Nights, convoys. If that's a recovery, what would be valuable enough to move at 2 in the morning? If it's nothing, why lock it down at all? Keep those two thoughts in tension, because the truth usually sits in the pull between them. Before we chase those trucks, you need to understand why anyone would be scanning a riverbed in the first place. There's an old motif from this region. When a king dies, the river is diverted, a chamber is built in the exposed bed, the burial is sealed, the water is released to hide it for generations. Whether every detail of that tradition is literal or layered with ceremony, the idea explains two things at once: a hidden tomb and the modern impulse to map dry channels where water once ran. If you expect a river burial, you look for shapes under silt. That is exactly what the team reported seeing. If you've watched this far and want part 2, hit subscribe. Now, the name that pulls all of this into focus, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, in later tellings 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, builder of walls whose bricks still show his city's pride, a man whose strength crushes his own people until the gods answer the city's cry and send a counterweight. That counterweight is Enkidu, wild, shaggy, faster than gazelles. He's fed, washed, taught, civilized. He meets the king at a wedding house and braces the doorposts as they fight. Neither can overthrow the other. Respect is born. Friendship follows. For a moment, the tyrant has a conscience. The two set out to carve their names into the world. They cross west into the cedar forest, where the guardian Humbaba roars with a terror people call splendor. Warnings are ignored. The guardian falls. The gods decide someone must pay. It's Enkidu. Fever ravaged him over 12 days. He curses, then blesses, then dies. And with him, the invincible part of the king dies too. Fear of his own end grips him. He abandons the throne, throws on lion skins, and goes to find the one man said to have outrun death itself. That man is Utnapishtim. He tells a story you already know from other ancient texts. A large boat called an ark, sealed with pitch. A storm that lasts 6 days and 7 nights. A dove, a swallow, a raven, a sacrifice, and a quarrel among the gods that ends with a single couple gifted life without end. Once, for them alone. The king tries anyway. He's told to stay awake a week. He sleeps at once. He finds a thorny plant that restores youth. A serpent steals it while he bathes. He returns to Uruk and points to the walls and the firm foundations and finally says what the poem has been trying to teach him. If you can't lengthen your days, deepen them. Build well, rule justly. Be the kind of friend Enkidu was. That's the only immortality this world will hand you without lying. Back to the river. If the burial underwater tradition explains why people were scanning the channel, the next question is what kind of thing would justify a midnight recovery? Here's a hard lesson from 2003 that most people miss. Manuscripts matter more than gold. Gold shines, but clay tablets and inscribed objects change what we think we know. They carry stories, laws, flood accounts, king lists, temple receipts, the wiring of a civilization. They are small, portable, hard to trace, and if you're building a story or burying one, Priceless. That's why the museum break-in in the capital of Iraq is so haunting. Shortly after Tomb of Gilgamesh was quietly removed from the Euphrates River, the local museum where the archaeologists were storing what they recovered was broken into. Vaults opened, shelves stood bare, some masterpieces left and later returned. Others were reconciled on paper. Still others vanished into a chain of maybes and last seen notes that never resolve. And the public absolutely tried to see. That's the paper sparks part of this. When people file records requests, they write what they're hunting for in blunt phrases. Resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, location of buried Nephilim, and other words no cautious official would ever put in an internal memo. Those phrases don't prove a chamber exists. They do prove the heat of the idea. They prove that enough people believed the story to bang on bureaucratic doors. Heat leaves a trace even when truth doesn't. Now we return to the picture that won't let go. Lowboy trailers under tarps at 2 or 3 in the morning, generators idling, glare bouncing off dust, pallets lifted, temporary blast walls nudging traffic away, soldiers bored at a checkpoint waving nobody through. If crates left, they went somewhere. Someone signed. Someone rented the lights and the machines. There are 3 kinds of mundane, boring paperwork that would turn this story from legend to ledger: a manifest or sign out that lists what rolled, a contractor invoice for equipment used, and a photo or video that shows a rectangular crate with the right dimensions being moved at the right time. If you ever see one of those 3, you don't need me to tell you what it means. Until then, this is what we can say. We can say a remote sensing team reported a very large king's burial structure under Old River Silt near Warka. We can say activity on that ground stopped and security tightened. We can say locals describe night convoys. We can say museum inventories suffered theft that have never been fully reconciled and that clay moves more quietly than gold. We can say public records requests contain language that shows this was very real. War produces both real seizures and misremembered ones. People see 5 trucks and tell 10 stories. I heard is not the same as I signed for it. Both things can be true at once. Something interesting happened near Uruk, and rumor made it larger than life. So where does the king of the oldest epic actually touch the ground in all of this? In 3 honest places. First, the city. Uruk is real. Its dual precincts, Iana for Inanna and the Great Terrace of Anu, anchor the poem in bricks and ramps and a canal grid once married to the Euphrates. The river shifted long ago. The old core now sits in desert quiet where water once flowed. If you were going to bury a chamber so well that time would need a drought to find it, this is the kind of place you'd do it. Second, the memory. When the poem opens by telling you to look at the walls, it refuses to float above history. It tells you to touch the work, read the inscriptions, walk the ramparts. The text begs to be fact-checked in dirt. Third, the kind of man the poem remembers. Whether you connect him with Nimrod, the mighty hunter and city builder of Babel and Erech, or you keep those stories in separate rooms, the parallels are clear enough to provoke arguments. Fierce ruler, hunts monsters, builds walls, pushes heaven, learns late. The names, timelines, and theologies don't line up cleanly, and that friction matters. But the overlap is exactly the sort of thing that keeps this story breathing across traditions. Here is where I owe you a skeptic's best case. Maybe there was no chamber. Maybe the sensor image resolved into something less impressive on the ground. Maybe the fences went up for a reason that had nothing to do with the tomb. Safety, artillery, a temporary depot. Maybe the night traffic was exactly what it looked like. Military logistics doing what military logistics do. If that's the world you live in, the silence makes sense. Nobody writes a public note every time a generator turns over. And here is what I personally believe happened. If a high-value chamber existed where a diverted channel once flowed, the fastest way to protect it, right or wrong, would be to close the site and move the contents. You wouldn't announce it. You wouldn't leave it for looters. You would palletize the heavy pieces, skim the small ones, work at night, and get it behind a door with 2 locks and a guard who isn't going anywhere. You would do it under cover of a larger crisis, because that is when you can do the kind of thing you can't do in the sunshine. Both stories can be told without lying, only receipts decide between them. We can be confident that a geometric target in the riverbed existed and that security tightened around it during a chaotic season. It remains unproven that a singular royal chamber of Gilgamesh was lifted whole from the earth and sent into a vault. The story is possible, maybe even plausible. It is not proved. If you ever see a manifest, an invoice, or an image that ticks all the boxes, the scale will tip fast. If a tomb was taken, someone somewhere is guarding bones, tablets, and inscriptions that could light fresh arguments and maybe change footnotes in 1,000 books. If nothing was there, we still learned something about how myths grow. Silence, crisis, night movements, and a public with more questions than answers. I'll leave the final call to you. Was it a quiet removal or a story that found the perfect storm to grow? Make sure you share this video with others and remember to subscribe.